Welcome to another program of Discovering Justice. Our programs can be viewed on our webpage, www.discoveringjustice.net. My name is Lucy Rivera, and I am the host of Discovering Justice. Please contact me with any questions at our email, lucinda.rivera@gmail.com. Today, we have a wonderful, wonderful guest, Nadine Cohen. Nadine is the managing attorney for the Consumer Rights Unit at Greater Boston's Legal Services. Hi, Nadine.
Hi, Lucy.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
So please tell us first, the Consumer Rights Unit at Greater Boston Legal Services, what kind of cases do you guys handle?
Well, given the current foreclosure crisis, the majority of our cases are foreclosure prevention cases. We represent low-income homeowners, many of whom were targeted for predatory high-cost loans, and we work with homeowners to try to prevent foreclosure and keep them in their houses.
Very interesting. And Nadine, how big of a problem is foreclosure in Massachusetts?
Well, I think we know all over the country it's big, but even in Massachusetts, last year in 2010, there was a 32% increase in foreclosures over 2009. And we have had over 12,000 foreclosures just in the past year alone. And in the past 3 years, about 35,000 homes have been lost to foreclosure in Massachusetts.
And is that an equivalent number to, it's kind of a high number for?
Oh, definitely high for Massachusetts. And remember, in each foreclosed building, it may affect more than one family because we have so many multifamily buildings. So tenants who are in those properties are affected as well. And you know, foreclosures affect more than just the families, they affect our whole communities.
That's right. So what are their options if people cannot pay their mortgage?
Well, unfortunately, the options are not great, but one of the options is a government program called Home Affordable Modification Program, or HAMP, where people can apply to the company that services their loan for a loan modification. And under the program, if borrowers are eligible, they can get their interest rates reduced to as low as 2%. And the goal is to have people's mortgage payments be no more than 31% of their income. So for people who have high-cost loans, this could be a really great way to try to stay in their houses.
But how does the Home Affordable Modification program work?
Well, unfortunately, it hasn't worked as well as many of us had hoped it would. First of all, it's voluntary, so the banks are not required to modify anyone's loan. The banks that participate are required to consider people, but there are some very strict rules, and not all borrowers and not all loans will be eligible. So unfortunately, it hasn't helped as many borrowers as it was originally intended to.
And are banks required to modify?
No, they're not required at all to modify. They get some money from the government for modifying loans, but all they have to do is consider someone for a modification. But one thing I wanted to tell your viewers is that people should not pay anyone any money to modify their loans. Unfortunately, there are very many scam artists out there who say to people, if you pay me $5,000, $3,000, I'll help you avoid foreclosure and modify your loan. And you do not have to pay anyone for a loan modification. People should contact a nonprofit housing counseling agency that does this for free.
HUD, for instance? Or?
HUD has many HUD-approved counseling agencies. HOPE is another agency, and I think that anyone who wants help, it's out there for free.
Then so for those people who want this help, what happens if they don't qualify for this modification?
Well, if they don't qualify, there are a couple of other options. The banks are supposed to consider people for what's called a short sale, meaning that they can sell their house for what they can get for it, and that would satisfy their mortgage. But I think that it doesn't work in many cases for people, and the banks have not been as open to doing short sales. One reason to do a short sale over a foreclosure is you're not generally liable for any deficiency. So if you have a $400,000 mortgage and you could only sell your house for $300,000, in a short sale the bank accepts that in full satisfaction of the mortgage. Otherwise, they can come after you for what's called the deficiency, the difference between what you sold it for and what the mortgage is.
And also the deed in lieu.
Deed in lieu is another thing where you can sign over the deed to your house to the bank. Doesn't always work. The banks have more foreclosed properties than they know what to do with. So it is an option. I recommend people asking for it, but it's not something that's all that common these days.
And if people are unemployed, they still have that obligation.
Absolutely. And now we have this new Unemployed Borrowers Program that HUD is going to be administering, and it is supposed to start in mid-March. And I'm hoping that it will help people who have a job loss or a reduction in income and who are behind at least 3 months on their mortgage. And they are going to be able to apply for the program, and the government will be giving loans of up to $50,000 to help people pay the back mortgage they owe and also to keep their mortgage current. But you have to show that you expect to be able to go back to work in the next 2 years, and you're going to be able to pay this back.
Great. So Nadine Cohen is the managing attorney at Greater Boston Legal Services Consumer Rights Unit. She's here today to speak to us about this very important topic, helping people keep their houses. And I am your host, Lucy Rivera, for our program, Discovering Justice. So please send us your comments at www.discoveringjustice.net. Nadine, what is the process for foreclosure in Massachusetts?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have a very strong foreclosure process. Most people know if you're a tenant and you're being evicted from your house, you have a right to go to court. In Massachusetts, you can be foreclosed on without ever having an opportunity to go to court. So there is no judicial process. Basically, the bank sends you a notice that you're behind, that you have a right to cure the default, and then they publish a notice in the newspaper and send you a certified letter with 14-day notice that there's going to be an auction of your property. So many other states do have a judicial process where homeowners have the right to go to court and contest a foreclosure, but we don't have that in Massachusetts.
And that's different from tenants who are going to be
Absolutely.
evicted, who have the right to go to court.
Tenants absolutely have a right to go to court, tell their side of the story to the judge, bring up any defenses that they may have to the eviction. Homeowners don't have the same right.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, I think that that is a major flaw in our legal system. And I work with a number of organizations in a coalition called the Massachusetts Alliance Against Predatory Lending. And we have introduced legislation to require the courts to have final say in foreclosure, so that before banks can foreclose, they have to go to court.
And is there any way to stop the foreclosure once process.
Yeah,
once it's
obviously you try to negotiate with the bank as much as you can.
Right.
If you could come up with the money, if you've tried for your loan modification. One thing people can do is contact the Massachusetts Division of Banks. They have had some success in helping people put off foreclosures, but a last resort is to file for bankruptcy. Once you file for bankruptcy, there is an automatic stay of a foreclosure. The problem is not everyone is going to be eligible to go through with that bankruptcy, so it may just be a temporary stay, but people can go to the bankruptcy court and file a pro se on their own bankruptcy prior to the foreclosure sale.
And you indicated the amount of foreclosures in Massachusetts. It's, what's the percentage? Is it of increment or decrease? What is it higher this
Oh,
year
it's
than
much
last
higher
year?
this year. It's
Yeah.
it's been about 30% or more higher this year, and the last several years have seen real increases, and the predictions are it's going to continue, and unfortunately.
The foreclosure predictions are.
Yeah.
But now that foreclosure affects not only the owners, but also those who are renting
Absolutely.
in a foreclosed home.
Absolutely.
What are the rights that these people
Yeah.
may have?
We were able last year, the legislature passed a really strong tenant protection bill so that tenants in foreclosed properties do not have to move out immediately after a foreclosure. If the bank buys the building at a foreclosure sale, they cannot be evicted unless it's for good cause, like they don't pay their rent, or until the bank sells the property to a third party. And that's a real protection for the tenants.
Yes, and what about for the owner? If once it's foreclosed and you live and that's your primary residence.
Right. Well, owners should know that once there is a foreclosure, they do not have to move out immediately. The bank has to begin legal eviction proceedings against them, and only a judge can order them to move out.
Okay. Is there any legislation proposed to protect homeowners?
Absolutely. It's a great question because we need protections. I think I mentioned the judicial foreclosure, but one of the real important things is a mandatory mediation bill. And that will require the banks to sit down in person with the homeowners to try to work out an alternative to foreclosure, usually a modification, or some other solution that would keep the homeowner in the house. And lots of other states have passed similar mediation bills, and they've been really, really successful. So we are hopeful that the Massachusetts legislature will support this bill, and that homeowners would have an opportunity to meet in person and mediate with a neutral third party to save their homes.
And do you feel that this has been successful lately? In Massachusetts? Have people been able to preserve their homes?
Well, not as much as in the states that have the mandatory mediation bill. There are a lot of very strong community advocacy organizations that have really been standing up for homeowners. City Life, Vida Urbana is one of them. But we really need the legislative protections to help homeowners, particularly those who are victims of unfair and predatory loans and really were taken advantage of.
Once again, our guest today is Nadine Cohen, who used to be a civil rights attorney. And
Absolutely, and still am.
And still is a civil rights attorney. But she is now the managing attorney at the Greater Boston Legal Services Consumer Protection Unit. Nadine, in the city of Boston, we do have that mandatory mediation.
Well, we, the City Council of Boston, with the mayor's support, have passed a home rule petition requiring mandatory mediation before foreclosures in the city of Boston. Has to be passed by the legislature, but it really shows
To
that...
become a state law.
Right. It really shows that the city councilors and the mayor understand the importance of the need to have some face-to-face mediation between the banks and the owners.
What can we do in Massachusetts to address this issue of foreclosure?
Well, I think some of the legislation is one thing. I think many of us have seen that the mortgages that particularly people in lower income communities got were way more than the value of the property. So I think we want to see people asking the banks to lower those mortgages so they reflect the real value of the property. And that helps not only the homeowners living there, but it contributes to the stability of the community and really keeps neighborhoods vibrant and keeps us from having vacant and abandoned and vandalized homes. And I think it would help bring our housing values much more in line with what the actual value of that house is.
All right, Nadine. I wanted to retake what you comment earlier when you talked about banks not required to modify loans. But then if you could explain that net present value or that.
Sure. Under the Home Affordable Modification Program, the banks do what's called a net present value test. And it's sort of a formula that they plug in a lot of numbers to. But basically, they're trying to determine, is it more advantageous for the bank or the entity that owns the mortgage to foreclose and get whatever money they could get at the foreclosure sale, or would it be more advantageous for them to modify the loan, get maybe a lower amount, but keep that money coming in? And where people are, what we say, underwater, so their mortgage is way higher than what the value of their house is. They may have a $400,000 mortgage, but the house is only worth $200,000.
Right.
If the bank forecloses, they're only going to get $200,000. So why not modify the loan, let the family stay in their house, and then they get something and they will get a better return. So that's what the net present value analysis looks at.
So if in that case that you're mentioning, then they let them modify their mortgage, and that is available. Can they apply at the bank for it, or how would they go about it?
Yes, well, there are two ways. You can go to the bank who you write your mortgage checks to and ask for loan modification, mention the HAMP program, Home Affordable Modification, or you can go to a local housing counseling agency, legal services program, a community development organization, and you can get some free help to help you modify your loan.
And in the instances where what you're saying, it's purely a bank decision, where if they feel that they cannot get any money from your property, they will not modify your property. But if the bank feels that they can get some of the money from your property, then would they just send you to foreclosure directly?
They may. They may if they think they could do better in foreclosure. But I think it's very short-sighted because I think having all these foreclosed properties in neighborhoods, I don't think is going to help the banks really see a return on their investment. And it's certainly not going to help our communities at all.
Well, and again, today we're repeating, and we're so happy to have Nadine Cohen here today. Nadine, what can we do? What are your comments about what you do in your unit, the Consumer Protection Unit at the Greater Boston?
Well, as I said, we primarily focus on foreclosures now, although we do several other kinds of consumer-related cases. We've had some cases where people were taken advantage of by businesses and paid money and didn't get what they were supposed to get. Right now, we're very concerned about mortgage rescue scams where people are paying a lot of money, to different companies, sometimes even attorneys, and they're not getting the services that they paid for. And these are considered unfair and deceptive practices under our consumer protection law. So I just want to caution your viewers again, don't get caught up in one of these scams. Don't pay anyone money.
In other words, if you see any advertisement saying, come to us and we will take care of your mortgage, what is the hint that they can find out so they know that this is most likely a scam?
Be skeptical. Nobody can guarantee that they can help you. If you know you haven't paid in 2 years, you don't have a job, it's not going to work. Be skeptical. Try to check out the company before you give anyone money.
Very good, Nadine. So what other issues do you deal in the consumer units?
Well, we're concerned about debt collection issues, some of the practices where people owe money on credit cards and companies take them to court. They often are getting judgments against people without really proving that it was the debt of the person and that they owe that money. So people, if they're going to court and a credit card company says, oh, you owe us $10,000, ask to see the original charges, make sure it's your bill. Don't just agree to a judgment if you have that.
Interesting. For people who do not know, and they having a foreclosed home, and how does that affect your credit?
It really does affect your credit really badly. So that's why you want to try to avoid it. Obviously, if you're behind on your mortgage, that has already affected your credit. But I think it would really be worthwhile for people to try to get modifications, try to do a short sale. The other thing I want to say is people really should check out an organization called City Life in Jamaica Plain, City Life Vida Urbana, because they have meetings every Tuesday nights of homeowners and tenants facing foreclosure, and sometimes people working together in the community and standing up for each other has been very effective. And we also work with an organization called Boston Community Capital, where they help to buy property back from the banks and give mortgages to the borrowers if they're qualified. So there are some community resources out there that people could rely on.
That instead of going for the advertising easy way out, saying they're going to take care of the mortgage, contact these agencies. It's really important work, Nadine.
Thank you.
And tell us how can we guard from? I mean, if you have if you entered into this predatory mortgage, you're in it. No.
It's very hard, and I think many times people were targeted for these loans. They didn't understand. Many people didn't speak English, and they were really taken advantage of. But I want to say about any consumer transaction, whether you're buying a car or you're, buying anything, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And be skeptical. Don't give your money away very easily.
No.
Check out the companies, and be cautious and feel like you have the power to know whether you should give your money away. Don't get talked into things, even if you think people are smarter than you.
Thank you, Nadine. And so this is great information that we received from Nadine Cohen today. And I want to thank all of you for allowing us to come into your homes once again to talk about another very important issue in the legal life of attorneys and in your life. And in this case, we talked about foreclosures. My name again is Lucy Rivera, and I am the host of Discovering Justice. We have a blog, www.discoveringjustice.net. And please contact us, email me, and let me know what you think about the program, what would you like to see, and I can be contacted at lucinda.rivera@gmail.com. So thank you, Attorney Cohen, for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Great service to give people legal information.
That you provide us also. So thank you, and thank you, all of you.